Hi, welcome back to TPI's podcast, To Think Minimum. It's Wednesday, September 18, 2019, and I'm Sarah O., Senior Fellow at the Technology Policy Institute. I'm joined today by Tom Leonard, Senior Fellow and President Emeritus at the Technology Policy Institute. Today we're excited to talk with Brent Skorup and Eli Dourado on airspace auctions and supersonic aviation. Brent Skorup is a lawyer and Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. His research areas include telecommunications, transportation, technology, regulation, and wireless policy. He serves on the FCC's Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee and is the Vice Chair of the Competitive Access Subcommittee. He has authored pieces in a wide variety of outlets and has appeared on different news outlets as well. Eli Dourado is an economist and recently served as head of global policy and communications at Boom Supersonic. Before that, as Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. He has written on a wide range of technology policy issues, including internet governance, intellectual property, cybersecurity, and cryptocurrency. His focus on aviation innovation includes topics such as commercial drones, supersonic flight, and flying cars. His popular writing has appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and other outlets, and he was formerly an advisor to the State Department on international telecommunication matters. Welcome, Brent and Eli. Thanks for coming to Think Minimum, our podcast here. It's fascinating to me that I know you as technology policy scholars, and you've both migrated towards a portfolio that includes aviation policy. I just wanted to start off on the debate that you two were having. Is aviation policy different from spectrum policy, and how?
Well, thank you for having me. I do think there are many analogs, and I laid out in a paper I published last year with the Mercatus Center called Auction Airspace. It'll be published by the North Carolina Journal of Law and Technology in a few weeks. But there are many analogs, and actually just analogs with other types of federal property, federal assets, like real property, like offshore oil sites, and of course, spectrum. And so I take that literature, that analysis that economists have used and apply it to this novel area of airspace, which and there's been a little talk of markets in airspace and airport slots, but not as I envision it, which is actual aerial corridors that are licensed on exclusive basis to certain companies.
Great. And so we were chatting earlier, Eli, you disagree that spectrum and airspace are different?
Yeah, I think, Brent and I have been talking about this idea for about 4 or 5 years, and we've never agreed on it. But I think that airspace in particular is very different from other assets we usually see auctioned off by the federal government, because usually if you're putting together a journey in the sky, you're going to be crossing over several airspace tracts as Brent thinks about it. So you're transiting multiple properties, and that enables all kinds of incentives for competitive games, for holdout problems, for a lot of sort of very bare-knuckle bargaining that makes it very difficult for the kinds of transactions that you would need to work. So what do we see normally in transportation networks on roads or on sidewalks, right, is we see it's a commons. There are rules of the road, right? So you know how you're supposed to behave when you're operating in that space. And then if there's congestion or some problem like that, we institute tolls, right? So you're not, when you're driving to Philadelphia from DC, you don't buy a license to access a sort of 40 tract of road. You just drive as you see fit, and then you get told if there's congestion involved, and so on. But you just follow the rules of the road and you go, and that makes it simpler for operators of these vehicles to be able to enter service. And it's better for consumers too, because you don't have to worry about monopolization by, if let's say an airspace tract between your home and your office were owned by one company, you'd be paying potentially a monopoly price or suffering inferior service on that route. So as we bring in sort of urban air mobility and so on, I think it's important the airspace not be open, that it is open to as many people as possible. And then there are very real congestion issues that we'd have to deal with, but we could deal with them through tolling or through limiting demand in other ways.
So for those of us who are not quite as into this as you guys are, maybe you can back up a step and talk about what the major areas of aviation innovation are going to be? I mean, how are our lives? I mean, when I was a kid, which admittedly was a long time ago before you guys were kids, people were talking about in 20 or 30 years, everybody's going to have a helicopter in their driveway. That didn't happen. At least it hasn't happened yet, and I doubt if it's ever going to happen. What type of things can we look for in the future that are going to affect most of us?
Yeah, I'll start. I'm glad to come back up. So, and I should say this airspace concept I'm talking about, the corridor auction and leasing. My paper's dedicated to a certain industry, a novel aviation industry that is, it's called eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing. So this would be intra-urban shuttles is how people generally think about it. And the reason I look at this area is because the airspace is relatively clean. So you can come up with new concepts. Whereas commercial airlines, you can't really do anything really new. They've just resisted too much. But with eVTOL, looking at a few hundred feet above the earth, it might be time to experiment with a new model because there are a lot of problems with traditional aviation.
So how is that conceptually different from, some people commute to work in a helicopter?
Yeah, and this is the question for the eVTOL or air taxi industry is, and there's a lot going on. So there's about 200 different designs for eVTOL aircraft out there around the world. Most of those will fail, but a few things have happened in the last 10 years or so. Many of the technical challenges with, and these, resemble helicopters and would serve many of the same functions as helicopters. However, they're much quieter, lower maintenance, they're often battery powered, and that makes it, in theory, more economical to have service. And the idea from the companies in this area, which includes Uber, but also Boeing and Airbus and other companies around the world, is that with ride sharing and with computation advancements, you can get this autonomous and drive down the cost to where it could be affordable to, say, professionals in an urban area. And
within what kind of period of time frame?
It's pretty exciting right now. So there's a Chinese drone company called eHang. They've been shuttling tourists in an autonomous 2-passenger vehicle for several months now, and they'll start commercial pilots this year. And so even the skeptics in this area, because you often come across this, you talk about flying cars, you talk about eVTOL, and people roll their eyes and say, well, we've heard this before. But you hear less of that because there is a fair amount of investment going into this, and because of this, this Chinese example and major players like Boeing and Airbus in the area. So it will happen. The question is, will it just be a glorified helicopter service and fairly expensive for a small percent of people, or will it be something that professionals could use, or possibly even middle class people? And that's an open question.
So if it was going to be used more widely, what you're talking about, an autonomous vehicle, so you wouldn't have to have a professional pilot of some sort.
Right. The designs that are out there are typically 2 to 5 passenger, and if you can remove the pilot, you increase the economic value of the service. But also,
so I could have one in my driveway.
You could, and there's a divide over which way this market will go. Will it go to kind of the flying car model that you can go, your house to your office? I'm skeptical. I think most companies look in this area, and most analysts look in this area, think, at least in the short term. If that does happen, that would be decades away. At least in the short term, it'll be high revenue routes between, say, a central business district to the airport or to a football stadium or something along those lines, at least in the short term. And I would say that the foreseeable future, that's what it would look like.
I think this will start out, so the urban air mobility market will start out as using human pilots, commercial pilots initially. And then at some point, as the regulators get more comfortable, it will switch to remote piloting. So, using connectivity between the ground and the vehicle in the air, there's no reason you couldn't have a pilot on the ground sort of operating. And that saves weight and reduces costs that way. And then eventually you get to fully autonomous. And that's coming, say, let's call it 15 years away or something like that. But at every step, it's getting, not only regulators, but also the customers comfortable with the advancements in piloting. But if you look at aviation more broadly, I think we've actually seen an incredible amount of stagnation in the field. If you think about it all starting in 1903 with the Wright brothers and their first flight, and then, by the 1930s, we had commercial service. By the 1950s, we had jets, including like transoceanic jet travel, get to Europe in really about the same amount of time that we're going today. And we had the first supersonic passenger flight, demonstrator flight in 1969. So, in a span of, what is that, 66 years, you went from Wright brothers to flying supersonic speeds. And today, we don't even have supersonic speeds. You had all these pilots coming back from World War II in 1945, and everybody thought, okay, now this is going to make aviation a part of people's daily lives, because all these people have these skills. And, what have we seen? We've seen general aviation completely stagnate. We've seen airplane designs completely stagnate. There's still some designs that were done in the 60s and 70s that are in production today, essentially with more modern avionics. So I think there's a huge opportunity for aviation to take a big step forward. And I think it has a huge effect on our lives too, because the thing about getting places faster is that it's not just like sort of a linear benefit. If you go twice as fast, it's not just like twice as good. If you think about the number of places that you can get to within 4 hours, if you can go twice as fast, you quadruple the number of places you can get to within 4 hours. It's quadratic. So if you can go 6 times faster, you can get 36 times as many places faster. So, and when we get to, hypersonic technology, when you're going Mach 5 or more, you're talking about getting anywhere in the world within 4 hours, anywhere on the planet. And combine that with something like urban air mobility, and you really reduce the friction of getting around the world and of being able to do business on anywhere in the planet and be home the same day, and so on. So there's a tremendous opportunity to do better. And the other thing that is really interesting to me about it is that it's a highly regulated sector. So it's a place where there actually are levers to pull, and for a policy analyst or someone that is interested in sort of hacking the regulatory system, like there's a lot of it's a target-rich environment. So that's why I think it's a fun place for it.
I'm curious to hear your views about that intersection between regulators in DC and technology like software and AI and aviation. So Boeing Max had a software problem, and it makes a lot of people nervous that they didn't test the software or didn't train the pilots enough. What's your view on that intersection between, East Coast, West Coast, DC, and California? And it affects, I guess, aviation innovation as well. What's the right balance to strike between seeing innovation in software, self-driving vehicles, and safety?
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy, because in software, you want to move fast and break things, but in aviation, if that were the motto, like no one would fly, right? So consumers, even today, it's the safest form of travel. Even counting the max accidents and so on, like globally, it's the safest form of travel that you can do, but people are afraid, right? And so to keep the market going, we have to demand a high level of safety. And so I do think it's it's useful, at least for regulators, to sort of have those demands. Like the Max is in part a software bug, but it's also kind of an oversight, even on the hardware. Sometimes they essentially gave one sensor on the airplane full authority to fly the plane. Right. And that's a no-no in aviation, and everybody knows it. And if you pointed that out to anybody beforehand, they would have said, oh, we don't want to do that. We should, if we're giving something full authority to fly the plane, it should be at least, that sort of average of 3 sensors, or something like that, triple redundant sensing capabilities. So, I think mistakes do get made. There is a lot of innovation that can happen, including by bringing in software and AI into aviation. Unfortunately, I don't think it's ever going to move as fast as sort of, the social media world or something like that, where it doesn't really matter if you break something. But to my, in my estimation, I worked with regulators a lot at FAA and so on. And yes, they're cautious, but they want to do the right thing. And they're, I found, at least on the supersonic issues that we were working on, we got a fair amount of support from the folks at FAA.
And it's, I mean, you guys know this. You're at the Tech Policy Institute. I mean, technology used to mean not that long ago information technology, and then media. But now it's healthcare, it's autonomous vehicles, it's aviation. It's moving into all these other sectors. Most of these are very, very highly regulated. As Mark Andreessen said, software eats the world. And you're starting to see that clash of this fast-moving tech sector into now these very slow-moving regulated areas. And there is friction there, as you would expect. But I found, similar to what Eli said, when you do speak to regulators or lawmakers at the federal or state level, they're actually fairly accommodating and open-minded about a lot of this. For various reasons. Autonomous vehicles, for instance, the case has been made, and I think people accept, it will make cars one day much safer than human drivers. And human drivers kill tens of thousands of people a year. And that's one example of why there's open-mindedness. Aviation is a little different. You have a very safe industry, don't want to rock the boat, but even still, you do find regulators wanting to improve human lives and let commutes be faster and cleaner and let people live where they want. And part of it is international competition. China has made, for instance, autonomous aviation one of the major pillars that they want to lead the world in. Similar to AI and 5G, it's one of those major pillars, and that's definitely part of it. And it should be said. This White House, Michael Kratsios, CTO of the United States, wants to see drones, for instance. Wants to see the U.S. be a leader in drones, and so they have their IPP project, which is public-private partnerships around the country, finding applications and ways of getting drone services out to the public. So yeah, there will be frictions, but I do find there is a lot of openness from regulators, and it will be a long process, especially in aviation, for that to be fully adopted.
So maybe, since you mentioned drones, maybe we should get back to what we started with, which is the issue of how to allocate rights in airspace. All of these different types of vehicles probably require different things. Obviously, traditionally we have this thing. I can't remember what it is. You only have rights to your property up to a certain height, right? What height is that?
My next paper is on the subject. The Supreme Court says you own the immediate reaches above your property.
Reaches.
So,
okay. So it's not a precise,
we don't know what that
number,
is yet. Yeah.
So the United Airlines doesn't have to buy rights from everybody that they fly over. But certainly for drones and for these other vehicles that you were talking about, that might not be an acceptable solution. So how do you see that going?
So I wrote the auction in airspace paper, and there are some other similar ideas out there. I know some RAND researchers proposed a couple years ago kind of real-time airspace markets for drones. I'm skeptical of the real-time markets, but I do think multi-year corridors would probably work better. But no, there's a lot of tricky issues, especially with drone airspace, low-altitude airspace, and stay below 200 feet. That's tentatively where a lot of people are drawing the line. Below 200 feet, there are tricky property rights issues about, do homeowners own it? In the paper I'm writing about this, it's interesting. Several states have expressly vested property rights in airspace to homeowners on the ground, and including the rights-of-way access above public roads is claimed by localities, municipalities. Above 200 feet, and kind of that eVTOL airspace, you might want to call it, where there could be shuttles one day. That's an open question. The law is not very clear. The federal government has claimed sovereignty over airspace, but they don't really claim ownership of it. But it's similar to spectrum, and you could imagine licenses to particular corridors. You already are seeing this. Actually, last week I saw an aviation consulting company is selling mapping of what they expect will be high-value corridors for urban air mobility. And so you already see companies doing this de facto. And that's what I'm concerned about, is that companies And vendors will start route squatting. They'll start squatting on the high traffic routes. It might be with helicopters, might be with drones, it might be with eVTOL pilot projects. But you don't want to get to the day, say in 5 years, where you're trying to figure out how to decongest this airspace, and you've given away this valuable public asset to the first movers. And there's no reason to expect the first movers will be the best companies. And so,
but Brent, this is something I don't understand in the point you've made before about squatting on routes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's very rare that anybody like keeps a helicopter or something flying, for 24 hours a day. Like, how do you envision this squatting happening? Like, someone's literally taking up all of the airspace within a corridor over an extended period of time.
I mean, much like Spectrum. Spectrum is not used all the time.
But this isn't like Spectrum, right? This is like if I am also operating an airplane in the same airspace, there are conditions under which the other person has to give way to me. So I don't think it's even possible to squat on airspace. I don't see how that is a meaningful possibility.
Who decides what the corridors are? I mean, now you can't fly. I mean, even planes. There are defined corridors.
Right.
I guess the FAA.
Right. Well, there are corridors for commercial aviation today at high altitudes. I think
there's Class A airspace, right?
No, I mean there are corridors, 9 nautical miles, I believe, wide and 1,000 feet.
There's a separation minimum that air traffic control applies to any airplane, right?
Yeah, and there's those corridors. There's something called Victor routes, airways that are fixed corridors that traditional aviation uses. There are helicopter corridors throughout major cities. These are fixed corridors at set levels. So you see this in Europe. You see this flying over the Atlantic. There are fixed corridors, and I expect if you take these companies seriously, that they will be flying possibly hundreds of flights a day in urban areas. This is what I foresee happening. They'll be flying once the technology is there. They'll be flying regular routes from, say, downtown DC out to Dulles, and then say a new company comes in and says we have better air traffic management system. We have faster airplanes or faster eVTOL. You can imagine the resistance to any incumbent company to a new company coming in, and the FAA would have to adjudicate that and make technology choices based on some criteria that they come up with.
But wouldn't the FAA just say, okay, everybody's got to adopt by certain rules of the road? So if you're operating, if you're a new person that comes in and wants to operate, you're allowed to do that, and the other person has to yield to you in certain situations, and you have to yield to the other person in certain situations. Just in the same way, we don't see people squatting on car routes, right? We see people operating on roads, and if a new company wants to come in and operate cars on a road, the other people have to let them do that.
Yeah, where you do see squatting and hoarding are airport slots, and
that
so
I agree with. Yes.
Well, and that's the only reason you don't see route squatting is because airlines are required to share the air terminals, and so they also share the airspace. But you do see slot hoarding and squatting.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's a major problem, and I expect you'll see the very similar principle when.
So then the right thing to do is to price or somehow otherwise internalize the congestion externality of the slots, right? Or so I would support something like auctions or Harburger taxes or something like that for airport slots, for airport gate assignments, and so on. And then if necessary for the vertiports that are going to be used for this urban air mobility, you can impose a tax or something like that to deal with congestion issues.
Right. And so that's the debate. Will vertiports be proprietary, single company, or will they look more like traditional commercial aviation today, where they're shared amongst carriers? And with that, and this raises another issue and focus of my paper. When you have shared facilities, you need a unified, possibly a sole air traffic management system. And one benefit of exclusive corridors is that you can have multiple what they call UTMs, unmanned traffic management systems. You don't need a sole one, and I think, frankly, this will be the biggest obstacle to eVTOL. Will be figure out technology, getting all the parties to agree on an unmanned traffic management system.
So this is another area in your paper where I think I don't quite agree with the way you characterize UTM, right? So you say UTM is a centralized, regulator of airspace, but it's actually what it is it's a system where they use sort of federated airspace service providers that exchange data according to certain protocols, right? Kind of like the internet, right? That enables them to deconflict air traffic, right? And then, of course, as a backstop, FAA is still there. They can still issue temporary flight restrictions. They can say this is a no-go zone and so on, and everybody has to abide by that. But for the most part, the operators don't talk to FAA anymore. They talk to their airspace service provider of choice. And that's actually to me, that's not regulation as usual and sort of the way you characterize it in your paper. I think that's a highly innovative system where we actually are getting FAA out of the day-to-day operation of air traffic management. And I think I think that there's an ambition within the industry and a hope within the industry that once we get UTM running, we'll actually be able to extend the ceiling on it all the way up to Class A, right? So we've been trying to get rid of the sort of FAA day-to-day operational monopoly on Class A air traffic management for years. And we've had this big battle in the FAA reauthorization last time around on should we privatize it or spin it off to another private body. Well, actually, making it a federated system is way better than just spinning it off privately, because then you have competition in the airspace service provision, and you can, as long as people abide by the sort of the data exchange protocols, then people are free to innovate.
Right. I mean, there is a certain element of federation to it. I mean, with any huge system like that, you're going to see some delegated to others. The problem. And I don't see many defenders of the air traffic management system we have. I mean, it's extremely hard to update. I mean, if you look at the next gen updates, which have been ongoing in some at some levels since 1983, there are tens of thousands of FAA employees working on updating this right now, and that's because it's a unitary system. Yes, there are federated elements to it, but everyone inputs, say, flight plans to a single system.
No, but next gen is not UTM. Those are very different things.
No, right. I'm making it. Next gen is part of the ATM system. Right. It's updating it to make it more efficient, and you can see it's decades.
It's not really federated.
It's years behind budget.
It's way behind budget. It doesn't work.
And
it causes all kinds of complaints.
And so with information-rich systems like this, it gets extremely hard to update, because that federated system, that's where it comes back to bite, is because you create all these veto points because you have holdouts who don't get on board with the updates. And that's what you're seeing with next gen, trying to get all these general aviation, commercial aviation to update their systems to satellite-based systems. Yeah, I mean, I haven't persuaded you, but
no.
There is an element, and I talk about this a little in the paper. There is a federated element. The problem with that is you create veto points when you try to update that system, and that's a big problem with the updates.
Let's think about this like the internet, right? So the internet is a bunch of independent networks that talk together with a shared set of protocols, but you still see innovation on the individual networks, right? There's nothing blocking individual networks from updating their technology. It's just, you might get, worst case scenario, maybe you could argue that some of the exchange protocols are not updated fast enough. But in terms of like the individual network management, you see tons of innovation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little different. If something goes wrong on the internet, you drop packets. In airspace, you don't want to drop packets.
It is absolutely much more safety critical, right? So I agree that that's a difference.
I'm learning new things here. I'm not an aviation expert or a traffic management
we've been around. Yeah,
yes, great. But I do see a theme of technology, software interacting with the physical world and older industries here.
Yeah, drone. It's there's a lot going on. I mean, like we said, I mean, the FAA is pretty forward thinking about it. I think Virginia, Southern Virginia, there was something.
Virginia Tech has a drone program that FAA has authorized and so on. So they've actually done a few deliveries with drones. like
But
sort
they
of
are,
another-
I mean, actually, I haven't really, they're not quiet, right? They make some noise, right?
Yeah.
It makes some noise. So it, being electric helps. Being small helps. Having multiple, like more than just like a couple rotors helps. Like so if you're spreading the lifting power over like 8 rotors or something like that versus like the helicopter's 1 main rotor, that helps a lot. So it's going to be, it remains to be seen because noise sensitivity is the big issue in aviation for a lot of this stuff. Right, that's what I spent 90% of my time working on with Supersonics was not even the sonic boom, the landing and takeoff noise, right? Like at near airports, and you get all kinds of NIMBY issues. And then this is the reason I want to keep like this local governments out of low altitude airspace. There's going to be NIMBY issues like crazy. Like if you think like housing is bad, like wait until you have local governments in charge of drones. Unfortunately, I think legally the federal government has preempted like all of the state and local rulemakings about like, we own the airspace and we regulate it. Like I think almost all of that is going to be like null and void if ever challenged. Because the federal government has said, if you dig a hole like 1 inch above that, that's federal airspace. Like so.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's their view.
That's their view, and that's actually good because it means that you won't get the NIMBYism. Or you won't be able. The NIMBYs won't be able to do anything.
I'm sitting in my backyard.
But the homeowners,
After work, enjoying a drink, I'm going to be.
If the sky is actually black with drones, that's actually like a win. I don't think like the sky is actually like is super empty. Look outside, right? Like look how empty it is.
Yeah.
The sky is so big. It's so big. Like and the amazing thing is like even if you're in a commercial airliner, right, today, like if you look out the window, you don't see any other airplanes. Like they are not close by. Like the sky is so big that I think it's incredibly underutilized as a resource. So I don't think we're to the point yet where that's really going to be a problem. But we'll see.
News stories though of like drones like peeking into like apartment buildings. Is that real? Like,
no,
that's illegal use.
That is illegal under like sort of state and local peeping Tom rules, right? So that doesn't. It's not about the drone. It's about the activity that you're doing. That's illegal, right?
So the drone could legally like drive to drop you off at Taco but not take photos.
Sure.
Is that the way the regulations are going to go?
I mean, that won't be like the actual tacos won't be specified in the regulation, right? But it'll
but it's the use.
It's illegal to like look through someone's curtains if they don't want you to, no matter how you do it, whether you do it using a drone to do it or not. Like if they don't want you to look in like. Look,
Isn't it public view?
I mean, in that case, like I think,
like what? Yeah,
I don't know the actual standard there, right?
And Fourth Amendment, like so, like if the
cops doing it,
if the cops have a drone, then it's all public view, right?
Yeah.
If the drone goes up high enough and your window's open, you have a reasonable expectation that a drone can see you.
Well, that's I mean, obviously, if you walk along the street and somebody's house is close enough to the street and their window is. You can
see it. You can say it's right.
But
I mean, Fourth Amendment law. It's a reasonable expectation of privacy. If you think the police can see you,
right? So the drone doesn't actually introduce anything novel there. I guess is the point, right? Is because if you have a reasonable expectation of privacy, you have a reasonable expectation of privacy.
I guess if now it's normal for you to expect a drone to be able to look through your window.
Well, yeah. I mean, this was always Scalia's criticism of expectation of privacy because once it. Basically, if police say they're going to do it, you no longer have an expectation. This was
right,
and he was right.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, there was a helicopter case like 20 years ago, and they were hovering, I think, like 400 feet. And I think they identified some marijuana plants or something. And the Supreme Court said, "Sorry, you have no expectation of privacy to your backyard from."
I mean, I guess if you have a telescopic lens or binoculars, right?
Well, yeah, I think Supreme Court, as more abuses pop up, and they will, you might see them narrow it, like they do with the cell phone case, the Carpenter case.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, cameras on the street corners.
Yeah, it's all public space. Yeah.
Right. So the surveillance world we're in now. It's public space.
That's the other thing. People just acclimate to it.
Yep.
And then it's kind of hard to say it's unconstitutional if most people don't care.
I mean, that's kind of different. I mean, and then it goes to the facial recognition. So all of that is okay under that line of reasoning.
Yeah, license plate readers that
Yeah.
basically follow you everywhere.
Interesting stuff.
Drones are going to be great. We're not going to get them in DC for a long time, but
Oh.
because of the airspace restrictions around the White House and stuff like that. So you won't get your tacos delivered by drone here, but everywhere else in the country is going to get them.
Wow. Where does the line end? Is it DC proper or is it
30 miles, I think, from the White House. I think there's one airspace that's 30 miles, and there's one airspace that's 15. Temporary restrictions. And then there's 5 miles around Reagan, 5 miles around Dulles. Lots of other restrictions like that.
Well, I don't know that I want drones come here.
delivering my taco?
I mean, I get my deliveries from Amazon quick enough as it is.
But they're going to bring it to you in 30 minutes.
Uber Eats.
Yeah,
Order from Amazon, you get your stuff in 30 minutes. That's pretty good.
that is good. But
Yeah.
I think I can. What are we doing now? From Whole Foods, 2 hours,
Yeah.
just a couple of hours, I think. I went to Whole Foods yesterday, and half the employees were packing up bags to deliver.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not actual people grocery shopping.